Welcome back. You are watching Newscentre. The docking of a Chinese ship in a Sri Lankan port has India concerned about its maritime security. A Chinese research ship has docked in the Hambantota port. This port has been leased to China by the Sri Lankan government. India and the United States had raised concerns over spying, but the Sri Lankan government gave permission to dock the ship. Sri Lankan officials say the ship has been allowed on the condition that it will not engage in any research activity. The Chinese vessel will remain in the port till the 22nd of August for refueling and taking in other supplies. Joining me now to take this forward is Ambassador Rakesh Sood, Distinguished Fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, and Srikanth Kondapalli, Professor of China Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University, will be with us as well. Ambassador Sood, if I can begin with you, give us a sense of the message that China is sending out by sending this ship. They're saying that this is only for refueling and stocking up supplies. The larger message here.
Well, the fact is that when the ship docked at Hambantota, nobody was allowed on board the ship. So clearly, nobody really knows. We do know that the Chinese have a number of such vessels. They use them for rocket, missile, and satellite tracking activities. We can see from the pictures a number of radars and other such communication systems that are very visible on the vessel. But if nobody is going to be allowed inside the ship, then clearly you don't have any other information. And other than so, you have to just accept what the Chinese are saying to the extent that you want to accept it. That's about it. However, the fact that we were concerned about the arrival of this ship was evident from the fact that we made a démarche. The ship was originally supposed to dock on 11th of August. We made a démarche. Apparently, the démarche was successful in delaying it by 5-6 days, but that's about it. So now we have this, and I think as the Chinese ambassador in Sri Lanka said, this is life. So if we were serious about the démarche, then either we should have made it stick, or otherwise we just have to lump it.
What do you feel about Sri Lanka allowing permission to this ship despite the protests from India, despite the protests from the United States?
Well, I think we know about the Sri Lankan indebtedness. We know about China's growing influence in Sri Lanka. That is not something that has just happened in the last year or two. That is something that has been happening for over a decade. And so I guess the Sri Lankan government evaluated what was in its interest and then finally perhaps could not resist the Chinese pressure. I would put it as simply as that.
Right. Just to also ask you, how do you see this, Ambassador Sood, in the context of what's happening currently between Taiwan and China?
Well, I don't think that this is linked. I'm sure the sort of the voyage of the ship would have been planned in advance. So it is not as if suddenly it has set sail from China and lands up in the Indian Ocean like this. This would be a pre-planned thing. The fact that India objected to it and permission was not granted by the Sri Lankan authorities caused a blip. The Chinese decided to exert their influence in whatever manner, convey a certain message, and eventually the Sri Lankans changed their mind, and that's about it. Now, we also know that the Hambantota port, as you mentioned, in 2017, because of the indebtedness surrounding it, was then leased out for a period of 99 years. In addition to that, there is a fairly large tract of land surrounding the Hambantota port, which has also been leased out to China for development and use by Chinese companies as a special zone. We'll see what happens. What we know is that this is a ship which is part of the Strategic Forces Support Command. Essentially, as I mentioned, there are more than half a dozen of these vessels that are deployed. They are supposed to be providing an integrated environment which combines space, cyber, electronic information, and other such warfare capabilities. It is linked to the Chinese satellite systems, military satellite systems, and it tracks, therefore, any missile-related activity or rocket-related or satellite-related activity that is taking place within its range. It has a range of about 750 kilometers. So if you draw a line 750 kilometers from Hambantota, you can virtually see that a large part of South India, including your coastal areas, would come within the range of this. Now, one, of course, is that perhaps we don't undertake any such activity which could be monitored, but that is provided we know the kind of equipment that is available on board, which we don't. And so what kind of snooping activity it is capable of is something which is just speculative at this stage.
Okay, Professor Kondapalli is joining us now. Professor Srikanth, let me ask you about the options that India has at this stage. We had protested against the deployment of this ship, against the docking of this Chinese naval spy vessel at Hambantota. Now that it has happened, what are the options that India has?
Well, of a similar class is INS Dhruv, which is slightly smaller than Yuan Wang 5. A difference of nearly 10,000 tons cumulative weight, and a difference of also the length of the vessel. While Yuan Wang is said to be about 220, the INS Dhruv is about 155 meters length. Nevertheless, the INS Dhruv joined only this year, while Yuan Wang 5 is about 15 years old. So INS Dhruv is relatively newer and has more sophisticated equipment, intelligence gathering equipment, than even compared with Yuan Wang. So this is number one option that India has. If the Chinese have said that, the foreign ministry spokesperson of China said this is only following international law, then India could also invoke the international law to enter into South China Sea or other areas contiguous to China, number one. Number two, of course, India also has the P8I surveillance planes. It should monitor the whole of the Yuan Wang 5 docking at Sri Lanka and make countermeasures. This is also a good testing time for India to look at the Yuan Wang more closely, because it is docked closely to the Indian coast now in Hambantota, and hence it is possible for us to also look at this more closely. So in terms of countermeasures on what India has to do, this is number two. Number three, diplomatically, of course, as India had given a lot of aid to Sri Lanka, nearly $4 billion, while the Chinese have been actually pushing Sri Lankans into the IMF fold and not declaring any moratorium on the nearly $7 billion Sri Lanka owes to China. So this is one that India could do in terms of diplomatic pressure, the third aspect.
Okay. I'd also like to ask you, this is also in response to the assistance, the humanitarian assistance that India has extended to Sri Lanka over the last few months, ever since it fell into a severe economic crisis. There have also been concerns about Chinese lending in Sri Lanka, and how that may have contributed to Sri Lanka's economic state. So what is this a sign of things to come? Are we likely to see more such visits by Chinese naval ships, more military presence, more such overtures in the future by the Chinese military, Professor Srikanth?
Indeed, this is an indicator. Yuan Wang 5 docking is an indicator that China is going to up the ante in the Indian Ocean region. We will see stepped up activities. Previously, in the last 1 decade, China had launched satellites for Sri Lanka, Namibia, Nicaragua, and other countries. So this will be helpful for them in tracking not just the satellites, but also the intercontinental ballistic missiles and others. Number one. Number two, increasingly we will probably see, and there were reports published that China had sent at least 53 surveillance ships in the past 2 years, 2.5 years. So this stepped up activity is expected to increase in the coming future. And when we look at the Yuan Wang series, Yuan Wang 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 21, initially they landed in Senkaku Islands and east of Japan. They said this is only research activity. And now 628 transgressions take place by the Chinese Coast Guard and the Air Force in the Japanese administered Senkaku Islands. So the predictable future for Yuan Wang 5 in Indian Ocean is likely to scan the entire Indian Ocean region for the future Belt and Road Initiative prospects, but most importantly, in terms of setting up what Julie MacDonald once mentioned as the string of pearls in the Indian Ocean region. The Belt and Road Initiative in 2013 coincided with Chinese upping the ante in Indian Ocean region with submarine visits and port calls to Chittagong, Colombo, and Karachi. So this is likely to happen if you look at the East China Sea, South China Sea, Pacific. We now see the Indian Ocean clearly laid down by the Chinese Navy.
Okay, Professor Srikanth and Ambassador Sood, I'll request you to stay on. We're going to focus on tensions between Taiwan and China at this stage. Weeks after a controversial visit by the US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, the United States has announced they will begin formal trade negotiations with Taiwan. The announcement comes despite China launching its largest ever military exercises around Taiwan. After Pelosi's visit, US moves have been seen as an attempt to give international legitimacy to Taiwan, even as China calls the island as a part of its territory. China has been warning the United States not to play with fire, adding there will be a big price to pay if US supports Taiwan's separatist agenda. Let me go across to Ambassador Sood once again. Ambassador Sood, we have seen Taiwan using its most advanced fighter jet in military drills yet, and this is in response to drills from China. How do you see escalating tensions between the two countries, and how will the recent possibility of trade talks between US and Taipei have an impact on the growing tensions between China and Taiwan?
Well, I think this was a crisis that was going to take place, irrespective of Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit. Because, you know, let's face it, when the US normalized its relations with China, beginning 1971, when Kissinger visited in a secret visit, followed by Nixon's visit in 72, till 1979, it took a 7-year period. And in that process, the US says that it acknowledged China's one China policy. And it makes the caveat, while acknowledging it, it did not agree with it. And similarly, there was the Taiwan Relations Act, which was passed. There were the Shanghai Communiques, which spelled out the terms of the US-China relationship. So that normalization process is essentially a fudge. It is a deal. At that point in time, China was interested in the deal, and China could not fulfill its ambition of unification with Taiwan, and it accepted the deal, and it needed that deal. The Americans, for their own reasons, had this deal, and therefore they bent over backwards in terms of the pressure from Congress, the Taiwan Relations Act, the fact that they acknowledged they acknowledged PRC's One China policy, but did not agree with it and all of that. But then over a period of time, fudges like these have a finite shelf life. They have an expiry date. I mean, the world has changed. The China of 2022 is not the China of 1972 that welcomed Nixon and Kissinger and agreed to open dialogue on this basis. So therefore, if that China has changed and that America has changed and that Taiwan has changed, somewhere along the way, this fudge is being exposed. To that extent, this was a crisis that was already evolving. It has now just been catalyzed and put into high gear because of the deterioration in US-China relations, which has been taking place over a period of time. The US-China relationship has already moved from cooperation and competition into an area of confrontation and containment. And it is that is being reflected. And you add to it the domestic Chinese issues because they're going to have the party congress where President Xi Jinping will get his third term, which is contrary to the practice that has been followed for the last 20, 25 years. So all of that put together makes this a kind of a catalyst. But I don't think that till we see the party congress through and till Xi Jinping gets his third term, I think tensions will be managed.
Okay, we've run out of time, but Ambassador Sood and Professor Srikanth, thank you very much for joining us here on Newscentre, giving us your view on the Chinese naval ship, which has docked at Hambantota, and also tensions between US and China and Taiwan at this stage. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Newscentre. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.